Good morning. We'll call this meeting of the Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee to order. Mr. Clerk, please, or Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Representative Fritz.
Here.
Representative Grills. Here. Representative Hardaway. Representative Harris.
Here.
Representative Hulsey.
Here.
Representative Hurt.
Here.
Representative Jones.
Here.
Representative Marsh.
Here.
Representative Martin of Carroll.
Here.
Representative Reedy.
Here.
Representative Ritchie.
Here.
Representative Shaw.
Here.
Representative Travis.
Here.
Representative Vital.
Here.
Representative Wright.
Here.
Vice Chairman Darby.
Here.
And Chairman Todd. Chairman, we have quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. And if you'll all stand with me, I'm going to ask Representative Reedy to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then Representative Ritchie to lead us in a prayer.
If you bow your heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to come down to the Capitol and hear the important issues that are taking place across the state of Tennessee, especially when it comes to agriculture and natural resources as we sit on this committee to make decisions that impact several folks from all across the state. We ask you to guide us through your wisdom and your will, and be it all this in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much. Any personal orders today? All right, I want to introduce my intern for this year, Miss Delaney Moore. Stand up. Y'all welcome her. She's a junior at UT Knoxville, a political science major. And we have a new research analyst, Ethan Bledsoe. He formerly worked in the Speaker's office. Welcome, Ethan. I'll read, yes, Representative Reedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Caleb, if you'd stand up, that's my intern from Trevecca. He is an English major, but also minors in history, and he's standing within a lot of history in the state of Tennessee. Make him feel welcome.
Thank you, sir. Any more personal orders? Okay, I'll take a moment to read off something here about our Tennessee River. The Tennessee River goes through 7 states, bringing a steady supply of fresh mountain water, but also severe periodic flooding. The first attempts to win support for improvements on the Tennessee River were unsuccessful, but President Roosevelt was able to bring together a coalition of progressive Republicans and Southern Democrats to devise a plan to uplift the states within the 650-mile river basin. The Tennessee Valley Authority drew great resistance, but it is one of FDR's greatest achievements. 75,000 men were tasked with reforesting the hillsides because soil erosion had blighted the area. They cleared the blockage at the Muscle Shoals, and then the dams were built to create flood control basins in the river's watershed. Power plants were able to utilize the water behind the dams to generate cheap electricity for homes and farms, and it attracted new industries' attention, which really set our state and the states around us on a totally different course than we'd been on at that point. So we're grateful for the work of our predecessors to bring this monumental feat, which probably couldn't even happen today if the truth be known, but it certainly benefits this area for flood control and recreation and all kinds of activity and commerce. So we are definitely grateful for that. We're now ready to take up our calendar. We don't have any bills on notice yet, but we do have a fabulous presentation today from Clean Fuels America. Mr. Jeff Earl is the Director of State Governmental Affairs. If you'll join us at the podium, sir, I'd like to recognize you. We'll go out of session to hear from you, sir. If with no objection, we'll go out of session. We're out of session, so you proceed with your presentation, sir, and then we'll follow up with some questions for you.
Yeah, sounds great. Chairman Todd, thanks for having me today. Members of the committee, my name is Jeff Earl with Clean Fuels Alliance. We're the National Trade Association representing the biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel industry. In my presentation today, I'll talk a little bit why a National Trade Association is headquartered in Jefferson City, Missouri, there in the Midwest, talk a little bit about the impact that our industry has on agriculture, some of the benefits of renewable fuels, mainly on the biodiesel, renewable diesel side, and a little bit about the policy that we work on throughout the country to help prioritize this industry. So I was sharing with Representative Hurt just earlier, most of my family on my mom's side is from West Tennessee there, and Alamo, Tennessee was kind of a second home for me growing up. So have a lot of great connections and with this state. I actually proposed to my wife just a few feet from here at the state capitol park. I think I forgot what his first Capitol Park. And also my dad was a country music songwriter back in the 70s, writing number one hit, the Teddy Bear song by Barbara Fairchild. So Tennessee definitely has a lot of great impact and history with my family. And so it's really kind of neat to be here today with all you guys. So kind of come full circle in some regards. So like I said, Clean Fuels Alliance, formerly known as the National Biodiesel Board. That's maybe if you guys have heard about us, that's what our trade association was known as for close to 30 years. But we were started in Jefferson City for a number of reasons. Several Midwest soybean farmers and their checkoff organizations were trying to find a new avenue to use this leftover soybean oil from the crush process. So as many of you guys know, you grow soybeans mainly for the meal to help feed poultry and pork, but there was this leftover oil. And so they knew that they were making biodiesel over in Europe. And so these farmers want to know if this was a viable industry here in the United States. And so through checkoff funding, they were able to do some research at the University of Missouri and see that this was something that could probably happen here. So 30 years ago, they started as the National Soy Diesel Development Board. We switched names to the National Biodiesel Board. And then just in 2021, we switched to Clean Fuels Alliance because we are more than just biodiesel. We also represent renewable diesel and SAF. All those fuels use the same feedstocks in the production of those renewable fuels. As I mentioned, we were started with state soybean organizations. They fund a lot of our research, a lot of our technical research, sustainability research, a lot of our education, market outreach, that sort of thing. So this is, we're definitely very connected with the agricultural soybean industry in the country. As you'll see in my next slide, these are all the soybean organizations that help fund a lot of our work. Obviously, we also get support from our producer members. So, if you're a biodiesel renewable diesel producer, you also help fund a lot of our activities as well. So, as we sit here today, we are about I think I just got the numbers last week, just over 4.5 billion gallons of biodiesel renewable diesel SAF is now being produced in this country, and we're only going to see that continue to grow. So here's our vision statement. I won't read through all of it, but just point out that, by 2030, we're hoping to exceed 6 billion gallons. And by 2030, with, continual advance in feedstocks, more crush expansion going online, hopefully to reach 15 billion gallons by 2050. Biodiesel, renewable diesel is kind of that carbon answer for decarbonizing the heavy duty sector. So as corporations and states and others are wanting to use, less fossil fuels, our fuels really fill that void. And so we're seeing a lot of great interest in several different industries. So the way we think we're going to get to that 6 billion gallon is looking at obviously the aviation sector. Seems like every day now you're seeing Delta, American Airlines, Southwest, all wanting to use renewable jet fuel. And so that's a new industry for us. Other major industries that are also becoming a lot more interested in biodiesel, renewable diesel are the rail and marine. These are both industries that have been somewhat hard to decarbonize. And so they're not going to be putting electric motors on ships and on planes. I mean, hopefully I don't ever want to get on a electric plane. I mean, someone else can go first. But also in the heavy duty sector. So locomotives, marine, these are also industries that are looking to decarbonize, and the least cost option they can do so is by using renewable fuels. Also in the Northeast, you don't have a lot of home heating oil here in Tennessee or in the Midwest or in the South, frankly, but in the Northeast, there's a huge market for home heating oil. That's how they heat their homes. in the winter. You get your fuel distributor come to your house, you fill up a tank in your garage or in your basement or outside, and that's a diesel fuel that helps heat your home. And so we're seeing a great opportunity in the Northeast with the home heating oil as well. So a lot of things that drive our industry is obviously public policy. We see a lot of policy on the federal level. Myself, I work a lot on state policy to help prioritize this fuel in this industry, and then also corporate policy as well helps drive this as well. There's also always a lot of talk about being energy independent, energy diverse, and things of that nature. We really help kind of add to that diversity. We're not going to be seeing full-scale electrification anytime soon, but we do think there's value in having a diverse portfolio of energy options going forward. And as I mentioned earlier, as electrification continues to increase, there are some industries that just aren't going to be easy to electrify, and we can help decarbonize those. So I mentioned we represent biodiesel, renewable diesel, and SAF. So this is going to be my disclaimer that while I do have a degree in science, it's a political science degree and not a chemistry. So I'm going to try and just make this very simple because I can't talk in really great depth about the technical aspects. But biodiesel, essentially, you're taking soybean oil or another agricultural feedstock, you mix it with ethanol, you put it in a big tank, you shake it up, do a little dance, out pops biodiesel. Renewable diesel is produced, mainly through a typical refining type operation, like you will see in a typical refinery. That's through hydro treating, a lot of high heat, high pressure, using renewable feedstocks like I said, soybean oil, animal tallow, used cooking oil, things like that. Similar to also with sustainable aviation fuel. The two options right now for SAF or the way they call them pathways on how to produce SAF is either using soybean oil or hopefully in the future alcohol to jet. So you're seeing a lot of corn ethanol interest in producing of SAF. This is a new market for them as well. Also, it helps impact the corn industry as well. So those are the three fuels we represent. They all use the same feedstocks. Here's what that looks like. So obviously, with this being renewable fuels, we see mostly using soybean oil. So last year in the renewable fuel industry, we used about 11 billion gallons of soybean oil in the production of biodiesel, renewable diesel, SAF. You also see fuel feedstocks used from the still of corn, from the ethanol process. Animal fats, all the stuff that we don't like to eat, that gets rendered down, and that goes into a lot of renewable diesel production. In the upper Midwest, a lot of canola is being grown up there. You can also crush and process that commodity into an oil, and then also use cooking oil. So my part about used cooking oil, so all of us that go to Chick-fil-A or McDonald's and we see all that oil that's being fried, that is now being used to turn into a renewable fuel. Years ago, this was a cost that restaurants had to find a way to get rid of. You had your teenagers working at the fast food restaurant, dumping it down the drain, clogging pipes, throwing it in the trash. They're trying to figure out how to get rid of this oil. And so the renewable fuels industry came along, and now we're adding value back to restaurants. So as this used to be a cost for restaurants, they're now getting an additional economic value because this oil has a economic impact. And so next time you're in the drive-through at McDonald's or Chick-fil-A, and you'll see on the side of the building like a little silver box. That's where the collector, the used cooking oil collector, will come to the restaurant, plug a nozzle in, drain that oil, and take it on to a producer that can then turn into a renewable fuel. So obviously, this is probably one of the feedstocks we're going to see continual growth in. Also, there's other we talked about that could also potentially add more oil as a feedstock in the future. So these are the feedstocks that we see in our industry, in the biodiesel, renewable diesel industry, and soybean being the main one. So this is just a map just showing the industry's footprint throughout the country. So obviously there in the Midwest where we grow a lot of soybeans, you see a lot of production. You also see it into the South a little bit. That's all the green dots. Those are all biodiesel producers. The blue dots you see down in the south and out west are renewable diesel. These are a lot of times old refineries that have been transitioned over to making renewable diesel. A lot of times the petroleum companies will take out a commission their least efficient refineries, transition over into making renewable diesel. So I just, want to take some time now to talk about the important impact that our industry has had on agriculture. As I mentioned earlier, that's how we got started. Soybean farmers wanting to find a use for this oil. 30 years later, we're like I said, 4.5 billion gallons now. But the added impact to agriculture has been amazing. So I have $1.06 up there, but essentially it's about 13% of the value added to soybean is the direct result of the biodiesel renewable diesel industry. So if you would take all those gallons offline, take all the production offline, you would see a 13% drop in value to soybean farmers. So here in Tennessee, our industry has added close to $80 million back to the soybean producers in the state. And just for like an average, if you're a soybean farmer on 500 acres, we're adding about $26,500 of value each year to that farming operation. The total revenue in the state of Tennessee from our industry is close to $280 million, looking at close to 800 jobs with total wages of just over $38 million. In total, the biodiesel renewable diesel industry, accounts for about 75,000 jobs nationwide. Many of these are in rural areas. So a lot of those biodiesel plants, renewable diesel plants, crush operations that I mentioned earlier are in rural areas. And so these are, good paying jobs in rural areas that I know are very much needed. The total economic impact of this industry in this country is close to $23 billion. So you can see we have a pretty big impact on not only, the economy, but mainly back to the farm economy and agriculture throughout the country. So I just want to, talk about policy a little bit. Since I'm a policy guy, you guys are policy makers. I'm just going to quickly talk about some of the federal policy that has been very vital to our industry. So the renewable fuel standard is probably the most one that probably gets the most headlines. Essentially, this is just a policy that requires petroleum producers to blend renewable fuels into gasoline and diesel. We've also been recipients of the biodiesel tax credit. This has kind of been on again, off again federal policy that's been very beneficial to our industry as we were getting started. This has been something that's been helped keep that biodiesel production going. The other things we also definitely are very work on quite a bit is infrastructure funding. So as fuel retailers, distributors are wanting to upgrade pumps, tanks, blending equipment, we try to secure infrastructure funding to help them to blend and use renewable fuels, and also fair trade is another big concern of ours as well too. So I'm going to switch to state policy. This is one that I probably work on the most, but essentially we have 5 policies that we really work on the state level. So the first one that we see are state fleet mandates. This is probably the easiest one to do, as most states have a state fleet. So your Department of Transportation, your other state fleets are required to use renewable fuels in those vehicles. Probably the drawbacks from this is, a lot of times there aren't a lot of teeth in those mandates. Either executive order from the governor can implement this. Next governor could come along. They can not make it as big of a priority, and it doesn't really drive large volumes. The next one is incentives. This is probably the one we see the most common throughout the Midwest. And essentially what it is an income tax credit or some other kind of tax exemption for either the selling, production, or the blending of these fuels. We see a lot of support from these, a bipartisan support, obviously from lawmakers who want to add value back to agriculture in the states, or also want to prioritize a more environmentally friendly fuel. And so we see a lot of broad support for these. The bills that we've gotten passed for the past couple of years have all been overwhelming bipartisan support, many times close to near unanimous support from the state legislatures, just because it makes a lot of sense. They can see the value, they can measure the return on investment back to the state by doing so. The next one, infrastructure programs are similar on the federal level. We work with states to set aside money for infrastructure improvements. A lot of times these programs, will offer money to fuel retailers who are wanting to upgrade pumps, tanks, blending equipment, and the only requirement for them back is to offer renewable fuels if they do take part in those programs. So this is something I thought might be interesting to Tennessee lawmakers. As I mentioned, those tax incentives, income tax credit programs aren't going to work here. You guys don't have a income tax, which, I'd love to move to Tennessee someday. What else was I going to mention about that? Yeah, so fuel retailers also, love to always looking for ways to upgrade tanks. Infrastructure improvements also help with economic development, things of that nature, and long-term stability in the industry. The next, we do see on occasion mandates. I think the most common one in our industry is in Minnesota. So throughout the year in Minnesota, there's a requirement that a certain level of biodiesel be blended and sold in the state. These are obviously hard to pass. Most state lawmakers in the Midwest don't like government mandates. You also get, Democrat or more progressive pushback because they rather prioritize things like electrification. So state mandates for renewable fuels are hard to come by, but we do see them occasionally. But in the Northeast, we do see a number of states that have bioheat mandates. So this just mandates that in the home heating oil sector that 20%, 30%, 50% blend levels in their home heating oil in that industry. And then lastly, clean fuel standards. This is something that we see a lot of opportunity on the West Coast. California is probably the one that's the most talked about, the low carbon fuel standard, the LCFS. These policies are implemented mainly to help, push electrification. But as I mentioned throughout my talk today, that the heavy duty sectors is going to be hard to electrify. And so using biodiesel, renewable diesel in those programs to meet those carbon intensity targets gives us a lot of opportunity. So as long as they're written fairly, they're looking at, technology neutral type options. We see a lot of opportunity in those markets, but there's only 3 states right now that have these types of programs: California, Washington, Oregon. Other states like New Mexico and Colorado maybe next. But we are seeing some increased interest in the Midwest on these policies as well too. So we continue to weigh in just to make sure that these policies are written in a way that our industry can benefit and also drive and meet the goals that are set forth in those policies. So here's what all that looks like on a map. So you'll see those kind of light blue, those are your state fleet mandates. In the Midwest, a lot of yellow, orange, green, red are all incentives for either biodiesel, renewable diesel, or sustainable aviation fuel. On the West Coast, the dark blue is those low carbon fuel standard type policies. And then the Northeast, you'll see kind of a mixture, but mainly those bioheat mandates. You'll notice Tennessee's white, so we don't have anything here in the state. We don't have a state fleet mandate I think that's accurate. Probably should have checked that right before I came in here, but I do not think that we have anything on the books here in Tennessee, but love to, hear work with you all if you think there is an opportunity to prioritize, some kind of policy to help grow this industry in this state. So that's what this looks like on a map. All the different policies that have helped, grow our industry on the state level. So one thing we always get asked about, especially I know there's many farmers on this committee, is, where's my OEM at on biodiesel? What do they say, I can use? And so nearly every OEMs, I would say actually every OEM supports at least some level of biodiesel, renewable diesel that can be used in their engine. nearly all OEMs approve at least a 20% blend of biodiesel that can be used in their engine line. So we're talking Caterpillar, Cummins, John Deere. These are all OEMs that we do continual work with on the technical side to get them to do the research, to do the testing, to approve higher and higher blends. And so you also see GM, Ford, Dodge, you name it. They all have some sort of approval of biodiesel. One other thing I'd always like to talk about is this, that by using biodiesel in your engine, you cannot void any kind of engine warranty. I think there's sometimes a misconception in that. If you heard me talking earlier about approval, I was very careful. These OEMs approve certain levels of biodiesel, but if you were to use it, you cannot void a engine warranty. But we continue to do work with them. We continue to see them to increase their levels of biodiesel in their engine platforms, and seeing a lot of great work with these OEMs. Next, want to talk about the health benefits of biodiesel renewable diesel. So over the past 3 years, we've been doing studies with they're called Trinity Consultants. They're kind of a nationally known air dispersing modeling organization, looking at some of the dirtiest cities in the country. So we looked at the American Lung Association's list of dirtiest cities in the country, and did a study of what would it look like if they would switch to biodiesel in that city. And so what we found through the 40 plus sites that we've looked at, you're looking at a cancer reduction of 45%, over 1,000 premature deaths avoided, and nearly 500,000 less asthma attack cases in just those 40 sites. And so if you add all the potential avoided health cost in those studies, we're looking at close to $8.8 billion. So very significant. So this is just looking at what it would look like if those cities would switch to biodiesel or renewable diesel, and the health benefits that would come from that. This has been something that we talk about quite a bit. As obviously anyone with kids that has asthma, this is something that probably hits home a little bit. How can we clean up, the air and the environment in some of these cities where we know there's obviously disadvantaged individuals who live in these areas that have no other options. And so by cleaning up the air, by using biodiesel, renewable diesel, you can see these improved health benefits. So I think this is my last slide, but just want to recap real quick. So, why biodiesel renewable diesel? Well, it's a domestically produced fuel using American-made agricultural feedstocks that are grown here, creating American jobs in rural areas throughout the country. It's good for the economy. It's cleaner burning. It's approved by our OEMs. And the increased lubricity cetane is only going to help the wear and tear on diesel engines, and is available year-round. So I think that's my last slide. This is just a shameless plug for our conference. I know you guys got better things going on February 5th through 8th. But if you ever want to learn a little bit more about our industry, this is a great conference, great opportunity to do so. This year, we're going to be hearing a lot from Pepsi. Pepsi is probably one of the biggest names that have looked at using biodiesel renewable using their fleet. PepsiCo is probably, I think, is the largest fleet owner in the country. And as they were looking to decarbonize their all their vehicles, they found biodiesel renewable diesel to be that lowest cost option. As they continue to work towards electrification, they can use biodiesel renewable diesel now and start decarbonizing in their fleet. So thanks again for having me today. Happy to take any easy questions. Please, nothing too tough. But thanks again for the opportunity today, Chairman.
We're glad to have you, Mr. Earl. Thank you for that information. And I have, in my small fleet of trucks in my company several years ago, we ran biodiesel up to 20% for a number of years, and I can testify that it's definitely an advantage. It ran cleaner and cleaned our engines. It was pretty amazing. That first week or two that we ran most of the vehicles, we had to change some filters out fairly quickly because it cleaned that engine out, and
Yeah.
I think it'll make them last longer. So it's neat to have this win-win situation where we can use a product that we're growing here naturally in our own backyard practically and put it in our vehicles and get where we need to be. So thank you for this presentation.
Yep.
Representative Grills, you had some questions, I think.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for being here. Jeff, right?
Yep.
Thank you so much for being here and for all the work that you and your colleagues have put forth in this area. I was raised on a farm, live on a farm, and that's how I make my living is on a farm. So this is very important to me, not only me, but my district, because we're the number one soybean producers in the state in my district. So I'm very, very concerned or optimistic about the future that we have. Can you explain or maybe just give a little bit of insight to those who may say that, well, we're trading our food for fuel? Because there's a hysteria that's, become somewhat the norm that they go to, trying to create some type of hysteria that we can't use these type of fuels because we'll starve ourselves to death. So would you maybe address that?
Mr. Earl?
Yeah, be happy to. So yeah, this is something that we, work constantly on, but we see there is it's not food versus fuel, it's food and fuel. So throughout the past couple of years, we're seeing significant crush expansion throughout the country. I think there's about 21 soybean crush operations that are been coming online. So we're going to be crushing more beans here, providing that meal. A lot of it, as you guys may know, that the soybean meal mainly goes into feeding our hogs and chickens. And so the more of that meal that we can or more of those beans that we can crush here, that means there's going to be more meal, driving down the feed costs for the poultry and swine industry. And that oil is, it doesn't go, and not a lot of it goes into food grade items. So it's something that we can see going into the renewable fuel industry. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to, also decrease food prices. Looking by the growth in this industry, I think we have some data I'd be happy to follow up with you guys on. I don't have it with me in my presentation or commit to memory today, but we've done this analysis. We've looked at this, and we see that our industry can work in tandem with the food industry and continue to drive down food prices, drive down fuel prices. One thing I did not mention that, by the fact that we were adding 4.5 billion gallons of additional fuel into the diesel fuel pool, we can also decrease fuel prices. That was a hard one to get through. But we do see that, there is sometimes, certain industries that, like to look at the renewable fuel as a reason why their costs are going up. We feel those things are there are other reasons to that, but there's no reason why we have to pick one or the other. We can both work together. We continue to add this value back to agriculture, decrease food prices, and also decrease fuel prices as well.
Representative Grills?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also, you brought up some of the health benefits from biodiesel. Whenever we look at, seems we have a nation that's pushing us in a unproven electric direction. Yet we have technology here that is proven to be efficient. We're dependent upon the American farmer rather than the communist Chinese. And that way, and since we are dependent upon the American farmer, we can be sure that we will have a continual source of power. Have we looked at what the health benefits are versus the health benefits will be if we go all electric, like certain people would like to see us, or if we can embrace the technology that we have here when the American farmer is raising our future fuel and see where we could be? Maybe, I don't know, that's not a popular study to probably be had at the federal level, but is the biodiesel folks, are y'all looking at that?
Yeah,
Mr.
so
Earl.
our tagline used to be better, cleaner now. And one thing we were always talking to, industry folks, lawmakers, as you continue to try, we don't stand up and bash electrification. As I mentioned earlier, we see all of the above type options when it comes to decarbonization. But the one thing we do like to recommend is biodiesel renewable is available today. So as the technology, advances, for more electrification, as I mentioned, the heavy duty sector is nowhere close to electrification. Those big rig trucks, locomotives, marine, they're not putting electric batteries on those types of vehicles right now. And so if they are wanting to decarbonize, biodiesel renewable diesel is the least cost option that can get immediate benefits today. And so we have done some research. It's what we call the time value of carbon. And so we've looked at what it would mean if you start decarbonizing today versus waiting 20, 30 years to then, for that electrification to come to your industry, how much more carbon are you going to be emitting into the air that now you're going to have to take back out? So what we always try to mention is that we can start making improvements today by using renewable fuels as those technologies come online. We don't like picking winners and losers. We don't like to bash one industry or the other because we do see a value in having multiple options. I think I mentioned energy diversity early on in my comments, and we still believe in that. So as those things continue to advance and folks want to, try to increase the, electrification, there are options that we have today that are available today that we can deploy that are going to meet some of these sustainability goals. I'll be happy to follow up with you on the time value of carbon work that we've done and show you some of those numbers.
Thank you for that. And one more question, Chairman Todd. Thank you. And Alex may have to answer this later on, but where are we at the state level now as far as our state fleet? And do you have any idea where Tennessee is as far as the amount of biodiesel that they use in their state fleet?
I don't think it's much because if I remember on my map, it showed that Tennessee doesn't have any significant policy for biodiesel renewables. But I do recall, I think there was, I think the governor did do something here recently, but I think it was more on the electrification side. I can't remember, but I will defer to someone who maybe knows that in the room. But like I said, state fleet mandates are nice starters, but they don't really drive a lot of volume. I think there's some other options that we can maybe look at as a group to help promote this industry in the state. But state fleets are always a nice starter.
Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Jeff, for being here today and going over this information, the fuel and how we're going to end up being able to move our vehicles around and be able to provide for everything that we consume in America is extremely important, especially here in Tennessee. One of my first jobs back when I was in high school was working for a LP gas propane accessory tank company, kind of like Hank Hill, I guess. And they sold a lot of retrofit components where it would adapt over there to the engines so that the vehicles could drive around utilizing LP gas. Are we seeing any type of increase or emergence when it comes to like compressed natural gases or any type of hydrogen fuel cells?
I'm sure there are. I'm not as well versed on, that type of industry, but I do know that's out there. You see a lot of that, and I think in California probably, where there's probably a lot more interest in those types of renewable options. But our industry, we're mainly in biodiesel, renewable diesel, but I think there is probably some of that going on, but I'm just not, well read on it.
Representative Ritchie.
No, thank you. That was well. I was just curious if you'd seen anything from a federal level that's taking place where we're actually seeing an increase, or do we expect to see some of that come in hand with the biodiesel side of it?
Well, I think if it's a renewable fuel that can help meet these carbon, intensity goals, you'll probably see some growth in it. I think, and so if that's what they're able to do, I'm sure there's federal policy that helps, incentivize that. But I'm not a propane expert like Hank Hill.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hey, and thank you for your time today. We have a facility coming online in my district. They're in, I guess, the trial or early basis now, renewable fuel diesel from biomass.
Woody biomass?
Yes.
Yeah.
What are
East Tennessee?
Yes, sir, Rockwood. What do you think are the opportunities statewide for large-scale production? And have we kind of a 2 or 3 part question? Electrical energy to maintain that process is one of the challenges they're running into now. And then feedstock.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested to hear what you think about those 3 parts of that industry.
Mr. Earl.
Yeah. So to the first part, yeah. So Colmar, I think, is that company that's doing this. They are a member of ours. One of their leaders sits on our board. So we're very interested to see where that goes. I think it's kind of maybe to be seen, where that goes. I think it's great that we're looking at additional feedstock that can go into this renewable fuel industry. And obviously in East Tennessee, you guys have a lot of trees. And so that woody biomass is probably something that could be a new option for us as feedstocks. As I mentioned earlier, we're hoping to get to 15 billion gallons by 2030. And the only way we can do that is looking for new feedstocks. And so the woody biomass is definitely one of those. As far as the question about the electrification, I'd have to get back with Colmar or the electrical power of producing that, I'd have to go back and talk to them to see what kind of issues they're running into. But it does, from what I've been told, they're hoping that comes online fairly soon. And depending on, how successful they are, we may see that, that grow. I mean, there's other obviously states that have plenty of trees in their backyard that they can use that, byproduct to go into that fuel. And so, it's one thing we've always seen in our industry. There's always someone doing work to find that next, big thing, that next feedstock that can help support this industry. And so it's great that Colmar, here in Tennessee, that might be an option.
Representative Fritz?
Just one follow-up to that. Forest floor harvest, is that something that your industry has looked at to provide feedstock to those type of industries?
Mr. Earl?
Well, say that again, forest?
Forest floor harvesting?
I don't know. I'm not too sure. I'd have to ask from the experts.
Representative Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, sir. Appreciate your presentation. I enjoyed it. Mine's not really a farming question, it's a personal question. Why do I have to burn DEF in my truck? DEF with diesel?
Mr. Earl?
You might want to talk to your OEM about that. I know it's something that is needed to, help with an engine exhaust, but I'm nowhere close to being a diesel engine expert. But you would still have to use, I think, DEF even when using biodiesel. But there might be someone on this committee that probably knows a little bit more about diesel engines on why you have to use DEF. I'm not an engine expert.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. I just wondered.
Yeah.
Representative Reedy may be able to shed some light for us.
And of course, it was cleaner air. And Chairman Todd, you are correct. I prefer to run biodiesel in my diesel truck because it does burn cleaner. But if we would run biodiesel, we wouldn't need DEF. And of course, federally mandated, way back when. But that's where I agree with you is some of the unnecessary federal mandates. And that was, I was just talking to Chairman Grills here, with the Western Seaboard being run by Democrats, but of course mandating what takes place in those states. And that's where you showed the map being white. That's where I believe if instead of mandating this, if our local governments are already running on diesel fuels and doing what they need to do, we, this legislative body, we shouldn't push the issue. We just applaud them and then truck on.
Representative Shaw?
Can anybody tell me what's the DEF made of? What is it made out of? What is the
I believe
products?
is it urea?
It's urea. And it's interesting, if you drive enough up and down your country road, that's why the grass is green. And so you're fertilizing your roadsides, and that's about all I want to say about it.
More cost to mow. All right, we have Representative Darby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Earl, for being here. Very informative presentation there. And along the same lines as Representative Shaw there, there's a few of us up here that run trucks, fleets of trucks. And this is just since you're the closest expert we got in the room here, this is a conventional question here. The last few years, you've seen a really big uptick in conventional diesel price-wise.
Mhm.
It wasn't very many years ago that it was a lot cheaper than unleaded.
Mhm.
What's your theory on why the big jump here the last few years here on diesel?
Mr. Earl?
Well, it's when we look at fuel prices, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint just one singular issue, but obviously, the wars in Ukraine and other issues, on that scale have led to, that type of issue. That was probably the one thing I would point to the most. But I think it's hard to, just, point and say this is the reason why fuel prices continue to increase. There's a lot of factors that go into that, as you probably are aware. But, as I mentioned earlier, the renewable diesel industry, by adding, to the overall fuel pool, we're able to help decrease those prices. And so that's one thing we always like to mention. But, I'm not going to speculate on one particular reason why fuel prices go up. Market conditions, issues around the globe can all affect fuel prices.
Representative Darby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that line of question, What's cheaper to make, unleaded or diesel?
Mr. Earl,
Unleaded.
is diesel not a byproduct of making gasoline?
So, I mean, if you look at, when we look at pure biodiesel, it is going to be more expensive than petroleum diesel. But through the, incentives and other policies in place, you see that price come down. And actually, a lot of times you find biodiesel to be cheaper. But I think if you're talking about the production of it, obviously the production of it is cheaper on the petroleum side, Just-
Thank you. Thank you for that.
just to be honest.
Anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more question. And I hate to hold you to this, and a guesstimate would be fine. But what would be the cost to conventional diesel, petroleum diesel to make compared to conventional unleaded?
I'd have to look it up and get back to you on that.
But you think it's cheaper to make unleaded?
Yeah, to produce it, yes. But when I was, talking about the actual price you pay, we see a lot of times through, federal and state incentives, the price of biodiesel to purchase is either at par or a lot of times cheaper. But as far as the production of it, it is cheaper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Thank you.
Representative Marsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Earl, for being here. Very informative. I have two, you said you mixed a lot of this up front. What percentage is bio versus what percent of it is
Mr. Earl?
petrol oil?
So when I talk about blending, so when I was mentioning, OEMs approving 20% blends, so that's going to be 20% biodiesel mixed with 80% petroleum diesel. And so that's that's probably the most common blend level you'll see OEMs approve. One thing that we're seeing a lot in California and the West Coast is a mixture of biodiesel and renewable diesel. So you could have 80% renewable diesel mixed with 20% biodiesel. That way you get the benefits of both fuels as far as the lubricity and the cetane value. So we're seeing a lot of that in the West Coast. But when I talk about blending, it's blending, either 5%, 10% of biodiesel with your petroleum fuel. And so as OEMs continue to do their work, we're seeing that approval go higher and higher. I think John Deere is working on approving 50% in their engine line. So you'll see 50% biodiesel mixed with 50% petroleum diesel, and that can go into your tank.
Representative Marsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So could we run a truck on 100% biodiesel?
Mr. Earl?
You can, and there are some that are doing that. Now, that does take some engine modifications. We have a member of ours, Optimus Technologies, that works with a lot of fleets throughout the country. Essentially, you add just another tank onto the existing platform, some other knobs and switches and whatnot. But you can run them on B100. A lot of times, what you'll have in these type of platforms is you'll start up on regular petroleum diesel for 5-10 minutes, let that engine get warmed up, and then it'll just transition over to pure B100. So that's something we're seeing a lot of interest in, because then obviously those your emission reduction goes way down. A lot of the work that we've seen done on this shows that there's been no issues at all with running these in these fleets. But if you are going to go fill up your F-250 with B100, it could probably work, but it's probably not something that has been approved or really studied at this point.
Representative Marsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one more question. How much agricultural products and fuel or cooking oils, all that, do we have enough to continue your industry, or do we need more of the soybean oil and corn
Earl?
products?
Yeah, we could always use more. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there's 21 soybean crush plants that are coming online over the next 5-10 years. You're going to see a significant increase in what we can crush here. So a lot, of the beans right now are being sent to places like China for them to crush, so they can feed their hog and swine operation, and then they send that back here. We'd like to see that bean stay here. We want to see those feedstocks stay here, crush here. So one, we can help continue to lower feed prices for the poultry and chicken industry, and also keep that oil here that can then also be used in our industry. So we definitely want to see that. We want to keep that bean here. What happens with the meal, if it goes to countries like Brazil and Argentina and China, that's fine. But keeping that oil here is only going to help continue to promote and advance this industry.
Thank you, sir. Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One follow-up question I end up having, as far as on like the gel factor, when you're looking at like renewable diesel versus the biodiesel, every time I end up going up north, when we get into those really low temperatures, having some rescue 911 handy is extremely important. What are we looking at in comparison as far as for like the gel factor with the bio versus the conventional?
Yeah, I can get with you and tell you the exact gelling, cloud point, all that kind of stuff with the fuel here in a follow-up. But, we do want to remind that, biodiesel renewable is still a liquid fuel. You still have to handle it. You can't just throw it in a tank somewhere and just, think it's just going to be some kind of magic fuel that's going to be great after the winter. You still have to handle it, turn the tanks, things of that nature. Same things you would do with any diesel fuel. And so, gelling early on was something that we definitely had, issues with. But as our industry has advanced, the specifications, the standards that you have to meet to produce this fuel have also come in line. So you see a lot less of that. I know I think it was probably pretty cold down here last week. Obviously back home or in Jeff City, it got pretty cold. You still have to handle that fuel, correctly. You just can't throw it into a tank and think it's going to be great at, negative temperatures. But there is, some issues with that. And I'm happy to follow up with you on exact, temperature levels and things of that nature of when that might happen.
Representative Hardaway, our last question.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, brother. I'll tell you two things. One is when it comes to the federal policies, incentives, and otherwise that are coming down that would impact consumption or production, do you have any suggestions for those that we need to be engaged with? And the second question is whether you have specific legislative initiatives that you're suggesting to us.
Yeah,
Yes,
so on the federal level, the renewable fuel standard is probably the one that, I could probably point to you as a specific that we want to see that policy continue to grow. So not to get too down in the weeds, but, there are renewable volumes that have to be set by the EPA for our industry. So if we continue can push our federal delegation, our EPA to continue to grow the volume obligation, that's going to allow our fuels to be blended into the fuel markets. That's one thing we always continue to push for on the federal level. As far as state specific, I know the incentive options that have been pretty popular in the Midwest are hard to do here because you guys don't have an income tax in the state of Missouri or state of Tennessee. But I think the infrastructure program would be something that would be worth looking at. So you just set aside a set of dollars for fuel retailers who, if they want to participate in the program, they want to take that money to make improvements to their pumps, tanks, blending equipment. They can do so, but in order to take that money, they just have to offer biodiesel or renewable diesel at their location. I think that'd be one thing to look at and be happy to talk to you guys more specifically about, because it has been done in other states and it seemed to be pretty successful. It's a voluntary program. You're not, forcing anyone into it. It's just that if you do choose to take part of the program, you have to offer these renewable fuels.
Mr. Earl, I appreciate you being here today. We are up against a hard stop, so thank you so much for bringing this information. It's very encouraging for us to know what's available to our citizens to utilize. So without objection, we'll go back into session. We're back into session. Any other business? Seeing none, we are adjourned.